Hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation with my very good friend, the Australian actor and director, Darren Yap. Now, Darren, I hope you don't mind, but I actually asked around about you before with this conversation because I wanted to know what other people thought of you, and I thought you might be interested to hear these little snippets. The actor Valerie Bader, she said, Darren is quiet, a deep thinker, gives safe rehearsal space. He's gentle, he's cheeky, and he doesn't miss a thing. And a crew member from Mamma Mia, she said that you were perceptive and inclusive. Dawn Martin, your colleague and friend, who was the resident director on King Kong, said, Darren was the calming yin to my not so calm yin. Wait, there's more. I had to edit these down because people were so effusive about you, Darren. The actor and singer, Jennifer Valetic, said that you embody heart. She said a great deal more than that, as you would know she would, but I had to edit her down too.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, if she's watching. And Luke Woodham, our stage manager, he said that you are eternally patient and kind and wonderfully imaginative. Well, I would agree with it.
A bit weird hearing this because it sounds like a eulogy or something.
Well, hopefully that's not for a little while to come, and there'll be a few more things to add before that thing gets read out. Darren, one of the things I do know about your work is that you work across such a broad range of genres of theatre and indeed scales of theatre, from the small to the very large. And if I can give some examples for the people who are watching, in the last 10 months, you have sung the role of the Sultan in the Aladdin production, an international tour. You directed a remount of your very successful production of Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam. You directed Double Delicious for the CAAP and the Sydney Festival. You were, just a few days ago, and I saw this myself, you were the onstage assistant for a live stream cabaret for Genevieve Lemon and Max Lambert. I watched you were very good. You were also, the list goes on, you were also the associate director for the 49th National Day celebration at Abu Dhabi, which was a massive event, if anyone saw that. You were the director, well, you are the director of a new production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in Tokyo. I mean, it's a very, very widespread. You have a very, how to say, mixed diet. Do you have a favourite dish?
That's the thing. It's really hard to say that it was an intentional thing, Anneke, to have a really mixed diet and love all cuisines, from, you know, a barbecue to a Japanese sushi to you know, I've always loved doing lots of different styles of theatre. One of the reasons I think was necessity. As you know, you're an old friend of mine. If to survive as long as I have so far, I mean, I left Theatre Nepean in 1988. So to be in 2020, the reality is I didn't have any other abilities except maybe the theatre. So I think part of the reason I have a diverse career as a director right now, especially, is because of necessity. And I've tried to very much set up those kinds of relationships with different producers, I guess. But I don't know if I guess, do you know what, Anneke? Probably one of my favourites is not in the past 10 months, but when I lived at SeaWorld and I did Spongebob Squarepants, and I spent 3 months there and watched the dolphin shows and went on the roller coasters when the floats weren't working. But I just loved that. I love that very much, and actually had to do a recording session with Tom Kenny, who was SpongeBob, and it was fantastic. And they sang Happy Birthday to my nephew Jagger. So that was a cool job.
Yeah, I guess we've all got favourites. That sounds lovely. And do you think, like, in your experience of having done all these different genres of theatre across, say, subsidised and the commercial musical theatre, do you think that those two have anything they could learn from each other?
I have to say that probably if you asked me that even, 2014, 15, I wouldn't be as specific now. And I have to say, if everyone's watching this, Anneke and I have had a very long relationship. Before she has been writing and is a writer now, we travelled the world doing Miss Saigon nearly in every, Japan, did we do Amsterdam, Korea? So we've done a lot of that. And I am so genuinely proud and grateful for my commercial theatre background. And I'll tell you why, because it is a bit like a military operation, as you know, Anneke, to put on a big musical. There is something boot camp and organisational that you have to do. And I reckon I really take pride rather than, I used to be a bit embarrassed, to be honest, Anneke, but I really now take pride in that upbringing. You got to get the third covers ready because Cameron McIntosh is coming to visit the show and he could fire someone. You know what that was like. You've just got to make sure the curtain goes up because so-and-so's broken their leg and you have to put the cover who's never been on in time. The magic carpet starts. So all of that commercial theatre background, it's not mamby-pamby, it's not grey, it is literally black and white and you do it. And I take that in to the world of the privilege I've had to work at Griffin and Belvoir Street and the National Theatre of Parramatta. The subsidised theatre world that I was so grateful to dive into, I took that kind of boot camp mentality to that world, and I'm really glad I did because clarity and communication are the key things in subsidised companies, and I get it because I think one of the issues is that with subsidised theatre, it's about funding and staffing and all of those things. So there's not full-time people necessarily in every department, and that's just the nature of the arts, isn't it? It's just the nature of this country with arts and subsidised theatre. So, but I guess what I'm saying to you, communication is so important in subsidised theatre because sometimes the poor sods are doing 20 things at once in that world, whereas in commercial theatre, there is someone who is answerable and you are culpable if you don't do your job. And I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's quite a discipline. In mid-March this year, as everybody watching will be well aware, the theatre industry got absolutely guillotined. I think it was March the 16th, if I remember the date. What were you doing at that time and what effect did it have on what you were doing?
I had just finished Jesus Wants Me for Sunbeam at Belvoir Street, and I think I then went over to Japan and I was doing, because I always wanted to do Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, which I know you did too. I wanted to do a new version of it and they asked me to direct with a new design and new staging. So as you do, you know, we're gypsies, and I just got on the plane. I kind of knew the COVID thing was happening, but I have to say, and we're going to talk about this a bit, the Olympics were still happening in Japan, if you remember, Anneke. And my dear friends that I've known for a long time in Japan were all going, it's all okay. There's no issues about COVID. So I was just on the tube. I mean, they actually are a land of wearing masks, as you know, but there was no news or information about COVID. So I was just in week 2 and I wasn't really hearing about what was going on. And it was actually my partner, Max, who just went literally to me, you need to get home because ScoMo's just gone, it's level 4 and Qantas are pulling back their flights. And I just went, that's ridiculous. And of course I watched the ABC News and I was just completely shocked. And it's the first time I've ever had to, I spoke to my agent and I said, I don't know what to do. And fortunately, Sally asked the producers to let me out of my contract and to get me home. And it was probably one of the hardest, and I was embarrassed things to do. But I have to say, my family, my 94-year-old dad, all of those things were more important than a show. So I got on a plane. The producers were very kind about it. And I locked myself up in self-isolation in the house with Lolly, my dog. And it was difficult. And then, in fact, they kept rehearsing Joseph without me, Anneke, and then they asked me to Skype in, and it was very hard in another language to direct it on Skype with an interpreter. But it was a very confusing time. And then it got cancelled. The show got cancelled because Japan caught up.
Yeah. Okay. You trained at Nepean Theatre, Theatre Nepean as an actor, and you've had an enviable career in theatre spanning, 30 years maybe? Sure. I'm sure there have been a few sort of twists and turns along the way, and I was wondering if you could tell us about a few of the bumps that you encountered that changed the course of your career or changed the course of you.
Yeah, I came out of Theatre Nepean. I mean, the truth is, I actually applied for NIDA as a stage manager, didn't get in. And
I didn't know that.
No, I did, I remember. And I think I wanted to be an actor, but I thought I just want to be in some dramatic institution. Anyway, I didn't get in, and Theatre Nepean was starting up, and it was offering a degree. And coming from an Asian family, and my dad who is a doctor, and my sisters who's a doctor, and my brother who's a pharmacist, dad was really happy that it was a degree, and so I went off there. And so I was really lucky because when I graduated, all of a sudden I was on a plane to Singapore, and I was in this mini series by Grundy's called Tanah Line of Singapore. And really from 1988 to 1995, 96, there were not many Asian actors who were working professionally. There were quite a few doing things, but they weren't devoted or wasn't their vocation. But in 1995, where I met you, Anneke, and I did my auditions for Miss Saigon, and you told me to come back for my callback with Lucy, my puppy. I came back for my callback, and I got like one of the biggest shows in Australia at that point, and I played the role of Tui. But it was probably the best and the most terrible thing that ever happened to me, because essentially the short version is everything was fine up to opening night, but I had really bad stage fright, and it was 6 months into the run where I just couldn't finish Act 1, and it changed everything for me as a performer. And I had to go off, and of course I didn't know why it happened. I mean, I think there were definitely reasons where I think I didn't feel like necessarily I was confident in the role, or I could sing the role properly. I think there was a lot of baggage I was carrying, because I was going, I'm an actor who can kind of sing, but I really didn't think I suited the role. But I had a really bad anxiety, and I was off for about 2 months, but I managed to get back on, and I didn't like it anymore. I didn't like performing. And out of necessity, again, when I'm not quite sure what else to do, I don't have any other skills. So I thought maybe I should direct. And that's kind of 26, 27 years old. And that was a really major, and has been a major turning point, because I auditioned for the director's course at NIDA and got in, and that just turned me around the corner. So, but the anxiety and the stage fright has been it's been pivotal in my life, and continues, because when I went back on stage in Aladdin, I thought all of that had left, and I had quite a few moments of that fear again. And as much as I found it difficult, it is the best thing I ever went through, because I learned a lot more about my resilience, and it made me a better director, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of the roles that you've had in theatre, I mean, representation is a very current conversation in theatre at the moment across all sort of silenced voices. I was wondering, what has been your experience of Asian representation in theatre?
It is a real epic journey. And, you know, as I said to you, I left, and I was one of the luckiest actors in Australia in 88, 89. I landed great roles, but the problem was, and the problem kind of still is, but it is better, I had to play Koreans, Japanese, Thai, Vietnamese. I could never use my Australian accent, maybe once or twice in shows. I remember talking on a soapy when the character breakdown was, he was born here, and I was speaking like this, and the director said, you probably need to do a little bit more of an Asian accent. I said, I don't quite understand if I'm born here. And I do think, and maybe I'm exaggerating, but I remember him saying, well, I think if you're too broad with your Australian accent, people won't understand. So I think, and I mean, I seriously loved it, and I got to work in most state theatre companies and everything, but I was always the Asian sidekick, the best friend, and literally like the microbiologist. So I got really fed up with that. And to answer your question, that was obviously another reason why I didn't want to stay as an actor. I'm very envious, but also proud of seeing Asian actors, particularly now, where there is definitely more freedom, and there is definitely more rigor in casting and not just stereotyping. But I still think we're very slow. And I went to see David Copperfield recently with Dev Patel, and I thought, I don't know if any of the audience has seen it, but I was inspired and kind of angry that within that Dickens story, there was no need of explanation why there were Indian, Asian, Black, Korean, like every colorblind casting idea, but it was not, there was no reason for it, and it was just what it was. I would love to see that happen more so in Australia. on the stage.
Yep. Yeah, indeed.
So I don't know if I've answered what you're saying, Anneke, but I feel very now responsible, partly as a director, and how I cast and how I perceive things, and my kind of my duty of care with those things. But it's difficult because I'm a third generation Chinese Australian, so I'm very much an Australian as much as I'm Chinese too. So I definitely sit on both sides of this.
Yeah.
Identity and what we do.
I just want to talk a little bit about emotional responsibility, if you like. When you directed Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam, and it's a play that deals with very emotionally and ethically difficult and rather challenging themes, devastating themes. When I saw it, at the end of the show, the audience was so distraught, they sat in silence, unable to move after the house lights came up for some time. I know you personally, and I know that you would never deliberately do or say anything to upset anyone. And I just wondered if, in directing that show so effectively, whether that caused you any kind of conflict, if there was any kind of moral conversation you had about knowing that you were going to hurt the audience so much, did that cause you any conflict?
Yeah, it's never been, as a question, never been articulated like that. I was always very aware of my responsibility because it was a story that Nick Enright gave me actually in '97. I knew when I read it, it was incredibly provocative because it was about suicide and euthanasia and cancer, and I also knew as a theatre maker it would be, probably Nick was right, a great piece of theatre on stage and powerful. But I always felt very cautious and conscious of that. And in fact, if I didn't get beautiful Grace Truman, to play the role of Wall, I never said this to you, Anneke, but I don't think I necessarily would have done it. And the burden and the responsibility of casting the child in the centre of the piece was pivotal. There were a lot of people who thought maybe it wouldn't be good to have the girl in it, but beautiful Stevie Rogers, who adapted the book, he really believed, like I did, it needed the child. But Grace Truman came in and she blew our minds away, my heart away, because she had lost a dad a few years, beautiful Jeff Truman, from that. And she was very articulate about death and grief. And she also talked about, I really don't want people to think that kids don't understand death and that they can't deal with it. She was really quite passionate about that. And I thought, we're okay. Like, if she's going to be okay about it, I don't have to mollycoddle and don't have to be really precious around her about it. And it just started from there. And in fact, even with the remount at Belvoir Street, and Grace obviously was a year or so later, she was always my barometer, if that makes sense. And she really made all of us on stage and off stage behave well. You know how rehearsal rooms can be crazy and temperamental. She, as a child, but actually the heart of what the piece is about, she really made us get our SHIT together. And I think that was the reason for that piece. It worked because Grace was incredibly inspiring and graceful. To answer what you're saying, the actors that I had two were beautiful Emma Jackson, who I've always wanted to work with since NIDA, and Valerie Bader and Mark Lee and Matt Whitted and Justin Smith, all of those, and Liam Noonan. They weren't just, that's the thing with casting, isn't it? They are terrific, beautiful, transparent actors in their souls, but they're actually great people. And it wasn't by accident. And I think after every show, I was told by a lot of them that Valerie and Emma said that they would go to the foyer and they would talk to people. There was a real duty of care, not only by the actors, but both the National Theatre of Parramatta and Belvoir were very acutely aware to speak and be there after the show if people needed counselling and help. Yeah. Those things were put up there, and they had to be there for it. I think there's a very fine line to provoke an audience and to shock an audience. And I think I'm personally not interested in shocking an audience. I'm very interested in taking an audience to an area that is incredibly dangerous, because it's the unspeakable. Beautiful Natalie Gams, who said that to me a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it. The things that are unspeakable are the most fascinating, I think, for us. And I think the story is all the things we're fearful of death, fearful what will happen when we die.
I'll just throw this in, this wasn't in our prep conversation, but the idea of trigger warnings, do you think that we have a responsibility to warn an audience of content, or that they may be, shocked and upset? Or does that diminish from their experience? Should we arm them before that? Do you have any personal thoughts about that?
Yeah. Yes, it's like sometimes when I've seen marketing and, particularly like Sunbeam, I remember this, and they nearly I don't remember, there was a draft and I had to read it and I went, oh my God, they're giving it away, that the child has, and I went, you can't do that. But I actually understood the rationale of the theatre companies going, we have to be very careful that the audience who don't know this new work understand the accumulation of what they're about to see, because it will shock some people. But I think with warnings, I think it is important to, whether it's an announcement or whether it's signage, I think I understand liability with theatre companies. I think that's okay, but I think it is our job within the space, from the actors, the designers, all of us, we're trying to do something with it. It's a magic trick, isn't it? It's the illusion of something, even when those darker stories that we tell that are frightening, but it's how far you tilt it. I think that's what you're asking me. And I don't want to, I'm just, it's not my personality just to be gratuitous or to purposely try to shock people for the sake of it. But if it's done for the right reason and it's done tastefully and theatrically, because I'm not a film and TV person, but theatrically, then I hope it serves its point. Because the ending will always be, that ending in Sunbeam, it was profound, and that long blackout of despair, I think that would possibly have triggered quite a few people. And I have to say, a lot of people cried, not out of anger, but out of catharsis, actually, from the piece. It's tricky.
I saw it twice. I was expecting to be more analytical on the second viewing, and I was expecting to not be affected, but no, it was possibly worse the second time. Worse in the best possible way. Sorry, Dan. Look, I'll change tack here, because it's interesting what you said about casting the young girl in that, because I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, when you're casting for a new work, what is your approach to the audition process? And I mean, what is it an actor gives you in an audition that makes you decide to cast them in the role?
Oh, well, especially, I mean, I guess, and that's what you and I, and, you as a writer, I think when it's new work, then of course, that's the exciting and absolutely scary thing. And I've tried to spend as much time as I can with talking to someone like Alana Valentine, like when we were doing Ladies' Day, like that it was very important. I understood her head and what as she saw the characters. I've been talking to Vanessa Bates recently about a new work, and I just didn't want to go and assume these are the kinds of people that I read when I read your script, your draft. I wanted to talk to Vanessa, because how can I assume that? I feel like I have, as a director, no right to assume that, but I need to talk and get to know the writer, surely, to understand, don't you think, Anneke? Like, I wouldn't want to cast your play without talking to you about how you see those sisters or the mother, or it's important that I do that as part of my homework. Then I think what comes the next stage is, which maybe I'm getting better at, is instinct. So then you are hopefully seeing, and I've been seeing some great actors come through, and it might be the first time we see them when we do the read or whatever it is. I think it's tricky when it's the callback, because you really are narrowing it down, of course, and you have to remember it's show business. And so the business side of it is you're working for either a producer of a major commercial show, so there's kind of that energy and agenda, but also in the subsidised theatre world, you're working with an artistic director, and you're working with a company of people who have their opinion, and you are sitting in the sandwich, and you are trying to hold steadfast to what you believe is the right person. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Anneke, but so in the callbacks selection process, I think it's always more slippery, and you're really trying to find absolutely, sometimes you've got to surprise yourself, the right people, because you don't have any template, and you just got to trust the chemistry of who you're putting all together as the jigsaw puzzle, and you've got to trust that you are respecting the writer. Even when I did Diving for Pearls, Anneke, I mean, I was in awe of seeing Diving for Pearls that Adam Cook directed with Sasha Haller all those years ago. So to actually have the to be allowed by Lee Lewis to do Diving for Pearls was a great honour and a fear, because I really, really wanted Catherine's insight into how she saw these characters. And I think the writer's really important to me in the audition process. They don't often, and they don't come generally, but their instinct about the rhythm and the DNA of the character is always imprinted there in the back of my head. And it's instinct. And as I said, unfortunately, because it's show business, sometimes it's the right person has to match that person. And if it's a musical, they may be the greatest actor, but they may not be the greatest singer. So there's so many parts of the business.
So are there any things that you would advise actors going into auditions never to do? Have you seen any really classic boo-boo mistakes that actors do when they go into an audition that you just go, oh, I wish you hadn't done that?
I think a long, long time ago, but it's that weird thing that sometimes maybe the casting director may not get the right brief from the producers, and so sometimes the actor or the agent hasn't told them the right thing. It hasn't happened a lot, I have to say, but I remember when I was the resident director of The Boy from Oz, and I knew Gail Edwards was very clear that she didn't want to see anyone walk in looking like Liza Minnelli. Oh my God, there are a lot of people coming in dressed as Liza Minnelli. And so they thought it was very odd when I go, could you take your wig off and can you go outside and put your tracksuit pant? But that's a case of, and yeah, it's a bit daggy to do that kind of thing. My thing really to answer your question is, and that's why I can now say it after doing the Sultan and being terrified. I know how terrifying it is for actors sometimes to go and the cost it is to go in an audition room. So there's a part of me that goes, I hope I'm not being cliche when I say this to the audience. I do want the actors to believe that the panel want you to go well. And what I sometimes often see is that the actor will come in and obviously their nerves is what they're dealing with, but it's almost like we're the enemy and we're not. We actually, well, I'm not. I want them to not come in a negative kind of frame of mind, if that makes sense. But that's tricky because our demons and monkeys really tell us we're terrible or whatever. But I've been really lucky. Like I've often people who've come into the room, Anneke, have been prepped, or I mean, obviously if they haven't learnt their lines or in a musical with their music, they've given their music to the repetitor. You've seen it too, Anneke, and the sheets of music are just falling all over the floor, and it's like really, it's not great, or it's in it's in the wrong key.
Actually, I'd love to tell a little story here, if I may, about auditions. And I remember we were doing the auditions, this is many years ago, for Miss Saigon. And Matt, I've forgotten his surname now, but Matt, the director from London, was over, and it was his birthday, and it was Australia Day as well, which didn't mean much to him, but meant a lot to us. And so we set up a gag, and we were auditioning like so many people. They were just in and out, in and out, in and out. We were always running half an hour behind. But we set up a gag, and we asked someone who was currently playing in Les Mis with the same producers if he would come in just before we break for lunch and do an absolutely cheaply bad audition just to set Matt up. And then we would come in with the cake, and we would have birthday cake for Matt on his birthday. And so we lined up, I'm pretty sure it was James Lee who did this too. We lined up James Lee, we had it all, and then I went into Matt just before lunch and said, look, I'm really sorry, we're due to break for lunch, but we've just got one person, the agent's absolutely insisting we see them, would you mind? And so James Lee walks in and he does an absolutely appalling rendition. I think it was of empty chairs and empty tables or something. And we were all like weeing ourselves laughing because we were trying to watch Matt keep a straight face. And then finally we break the gag, we come in with the cake, we all have a good laugh. And then we get to the end of the cake and Matt just says, Matt, the director, says, I think that guy James has actually got something. I think I want him in the show. And he ended up being cast.
Yes.
So, yeah, one of those lucky breaks.
You just never know, do you?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how, when you're directing a show, this is one for the tech students watching. How important is your relationship with the various technical departments? How involved with them are you?
You know, you are my witness, Anneke, but if I counted on one hand who have become in my life my friends, you were one of them. As when you started as a stage manager, Mary Ben, who's worked at NIDA, Dawn Martin, Luke Woodham, like most of my mates, because they have been my lifeline, and I'm not just saying it because I'm online to NIDA, they do become my lifeline. And the technical department, I love them, and I can't, particularly when the shows are those bigger monsters and events, unless you have that relationship with them, I don't know how you can do it, because there's too many components to the machine. But even if it was a play, a two-hander, that I often am absolutely wanting the stage manager to like me, because I really need their input and wisdom, not just about scheduling. I'm not even talking about that. Just, I often talk, and we've talked about it, Anneke, too, in our lives. I think it's maybe an EQ thing, but it takes a lot for when you can read a room. And so I think that's part of the gig and the dance that a director and a stage manager are supposed to have together. And I think that's really important. And I talk to you a lot about that. And Mary Ben and I used to talk about that too. I think reading the room of what is unsaid allows you to kind of know how far you can move forward and when you need to step back. And I've always gauged and tried to keep a room based on that. And my stage manager often has been the one who's helped me with that advice, because I just can't do it without them. And you have got me out of some very, very difficult moments, Anneke, in Japan and Korea, as you know, when we're dealing with another culture. And with your grace and spirituality, you've just helped me kind of deal with lots of nearly car crashes with shows.
I'm not sure I was that much help. Actually, speaking of those productions, I mean, you over the years, you've been associate director on a lot of the big musicals in countries such as Japan, when you were doing Miss Saigon. I mean, you and I have done several productions of Miss Saigon in Japan. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the joys or the pitfalls of doing a Western style production in a non-Western culture, and also of working with a cast and crew where you don't speak the same language.
It's quite surreal. I mean, even with Joseph, after all these years, Anneke, you know, when you're and because you get used to your interpreter and they become friends, like Yoko are my friends, but there's this amazing thing that happens that you're talking and they're talking simultaneously with you, and you're watching the cast and the crew just accept it. But the thing that always I'm not good at is that I tend to yap, and I go on and on and on forever. And there's points where I've had the interpreter where they've actually had to grab my hand or my mouth and shut me up, because obviously to interpret that, the sequence and the syllables and the scansion is so much longer. So particularly when you are rushing to get to the end of Act 1 by the end of week 2, I've had to learn very quickly to really abbreviate some of my sentences and concepts. So that in itself is quite strange, to have someone simultaneously talking with you when you're in a room of 100 people. But Saigon is such a weird thing that's been a blessing and curse in my life, because it is the Madame Butterfly story, as you know, and I was in it I was in it with Robert Grubb in 1992, whatever. But I remember in Japan, Anneke, when we first did it with the Japanese cast, and as they started to trust me, because it is all about that, and a foreigner, and then willing to be honest about how they felt. I remember Okusan, and he said to me one day, "This is so crap, you know, you've come over here with the story of an Asian submissive exotic girl who kills herself for a man." I went, "I know." And so, and the deal was, and I had to kind of say to the lead actors particularly, I said, "I know that and I get that, but also that's what we've signed on to do. So let's find our way with integrity and truth to make this work." And it is quite weird that you've done this show, Miss Saigon, over 20 years. They've done it every second year, as you know, Anneke. So they love the show, but it's got so many cultural issues about it. But I think that's weird. But I have to say, having this Asian face, And I guess that's I've been very lucky to be able to work over there. But as a Westerner, I've been able to serve what Cameron's wanted me to do, but absolutely protect and be their buffer. Because the acting style is different, Anneke, as you know, let alone the crew system and calling is different. Everything is so different in Japan as well as Korea. So you either come in and be a missionary, which you and I loathe doing, or you just have to get on their page. And often it will take longer because it's in another language. And I know, and that's the same in the Middle East when I did Doha or when I did Abu Dhabi with Nick Fry, you know, that's when I met him with Michael Scott Mitchell. It just takes more time in another language, and you can't just be culturally bash them over and say, this is the way we do it. But I've had, as you were great, I've had kind of weird things where I've had an interpreter who didn't really like me. So every time in Korea I would say something, I think Young would actually say completely opposite thing. So I'd say to him and Chris, this moment is like a car crash. You're desperately clinging on to each other because it's been like a car crash. And Yong would say to the actors, this is a scene like where you're in a warm bath. It was Michael Lee, who was bilingual American, and we went, hey brother, I just want you to know that when you're saying that, Yong's saying that.
Yeah, doesn't help with the translation. I mean, so you said we have to be adapt and flexible. And I think with this COVID situation, we are all looking for ways to adapt, to adjust, to reinvent, and to get back to normal. And I'm looking for the silver lining in this. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, has this big disruption managed to unearth any reveal anything that will strengthen our theatre in the future, do you think?
The only piece I can get, and Anneke and I'm not going to steal what you just said to me before we went live to air, is that when we were together in March, Anneke, you were saying that as a theatre community, we're very used to being resilient and spontaneous, and you lose the job after 4 weeks. And that is on our side. So you would think that we are very used to have a kind of job that there is uncertainty. And maybe that is right or wrong. And I don't even know if it's helpful saying that. I think my issue right now is that there is no chance for this to be over yet. And I think we just have to wake up and smell the coffee about that. So every time I say the phrase next to normal, I'm not meaning the musical, but I think if we think that we're going to go back to normal, I don't think that will happen. Or if it happens, it will happen for a long time. And I'm not being pessimistic. I think we have to learn to adapt. If I'm completely wrong about that, great. But like the Great Depression, maybe we'll go into this, we'll have illegal speakeasies, Anneke, and there'll be an underworld where we as bohemians and artists will survive. Who knows? But this is not going to go away quickly. Yeah. And we don't adapt, and if we are petulant and go, I want it to be the way it was and I want to have the career that I had, it just can't be. And the only thing I can say with love is that everyone is going through this, whether you're 17 or 18 or you're 63, everyone is feeling this. This is unprecedented. The theatre in Australia, in the world it's a massive pile-up. And I think we just have to find ways. In fact, Anneke, you said to me in Amsterdam a long time ago, we should do more soirees. I was thinking about this last night. So, maybe we have to think differently about how we tell stories and in different spaces. Ventilation and being stuck too long is not working right now. And the idea of sitting around in a house and hearing stories or poetry, and there is something in that, or in a car park, I think we just have to adapt. I think streaming is has been a really valuable and important tool, but it is not theatre, and it will never be theatre. It will never replace the immediate connection. And we have to find a way to get back to that, but I don't know what that is right now, except smaller gatherings or different spaces. Shorter shows.
Yes, well, we're all a fan of those. There will be an opportunity for people to ask Darren questions, so get those ready if you'd like to. But before we get to the Q&A section, And speaking of getting back to normal, Darren, would you like to talk a little bit about the next show you're doing at NIDA?
That was a very good segue, Anneke. Yeah, look, for a long time, and I remember when I saw maybe Andrew Ross in the foyer or other NIDA alumni, I would always say I would love to come and direct a grad show. So Just Planets didn't line up and all that. So when Di actually last year asked me about Next to Normal, I remember, and Di will know if I'm exaggerating, when absolutely I would love to do it. I'd love to work with Andrew. I've never worked with Andrew, and I've always wanted to do a rock musical. I always do these kind of serious Schoenberg things, and I wanted to do something with guts and blood, metaphorically. But I wanted to do something essentially at NIDA, and I just jumped at the chance to do that. We're in the process with gorgeous Charlotte Montgomery, who's doing costumes, and Nick Fry. We're just now finishing off and signing off on the design of that, which is really exciting. And exactly what we were just talking about 5 minutes ago, Anneke, what we are dealing with is how do we rehearse this? That is the kind of truth. And if I go, we have to do it like this and be rigid about it, it's not going to happen. We have to be flexible and ready for Gladys to give us an update, and we have to adapt. And I think as theatre people, that's really exciting, but there's no choice. So how we end up doing the show will to be continued, to be confirmed. But I'm very excited to be back in a rehearsal room, full stop, and to be at NIDA. And it's a really wonderful and tough show. It's kind of an anti-musical. And I remember saying that to a few people. And why I say that, like similar to Miracle City, it's not where I think because it deals with some very difficult issues, and particularly now with mental health. I think it's a really important time and place to have that conversation. And I've actually already been talking to Di about that we, again, because of what you said about triggers and conversations about how we look after the audience, if we're going to deal with some of these things that are about the psyche, we need to be very careful as caretakers of that. Yeah,
absolutely. And so that the show is called Next to Normal. And which venue will it be in?
In the Parade. And absolutely, Di reminded me, which is great to say, we are, for all those reasons of constraints because of COVID, we're in a big space and there are 6 beautiful human beings plus our wonderful crew in there. So we can do what we need to do and we can do it safely. But it's good that we're in a big space to do that.
Yeah, well, no, all the best for that. I look forward to being able to come and see it if they ever let me out of Victoria. Yeah, well, we do have some time for some questions if anyone wants to pop onto either the Q&A section or the chat section. So if you have any questions for Darren, just type them in. But in the meantime, we're waiting for those to come through. I heard through the grapevine that you were expecting a new addition to your family.
Yes, on Monday the 31st. So, yeah, I wouldn't have thought that through this COVID time that Max and I would have lost our dog Lolly, but some of you may know Lolly, which is an Airedale, and she only sadly, it was a shit. She lived to only 5, and it was like a motor neurone disease. So on June the 1st, we had to put her down. And that was hideous. And there were other words I could say, but we're on air. So we're very excited because we're getting a new puppy called Picnic, and she arrives on Monday. And I'm really looking forward to taking on the challenge of toilet training and puppies again.
Brilliant. We do have a question here from Kylie Harris, and she asks you, how do you deal with your anxiety? And I'm sure this is something everyone will be interested in because I think we all have it to some degree.
Yeah, look, I'm scratching myself already. I don't know if some of you, and I am a bit hippie with this stuff. I remember during Aladdin, because I was shocked that that anxiety had come back. But Brene Brown always, some of you obviously know who I'm talking about, but what the essence of what she talks about shame and vulnerability and courage and those ideas there. I think the problem with stage fright and anxiety is that people don't talk about it. And it's almost you allow it to conquer you and it chains you down. But I do think that as I started not to whinge about it, but talk about my fear, not to necessarily all the cast members, but people I could trust, I found that it was liberating. So on one level, when you talk about that stuff, it frees it up because it has nowhere to kind of be bottled up, because you're articulating your fear and your shame. Because my problem with my anxiety, and they all come in different degrees, I just felt shameful or I wasn't good enough, and that's how it manifested itself, Anneke. But I also did, I've seen this great kinesiologist, Emma Macri, and and she's into, obviously into breathing and things like that, where I would, on a scientific level, spend as much time as I can before the show, just slowing down my heart rate. Because what happens, obviously, and it is harder in a musical, everyone, because once your heart rate and your terror goes up, everything, including the vocal instrument, can go out of whack and out of tune. So I just would have to become incredibly nice to myself and shut myself into my room. And I was lucky to have a room and just do some yoga and some breathing and everything. But the biggest thing for me was to actually articulate my fear. And I do, even talking about it now, I find it really liberating. And so as a director, I'm really open and I talk about those things, because I have to say, unless you stand, I always say this, there were days and nights I was so fearful I would have to walk, Anneke, from downstage left to centre stage in front of 2,500 people. And there were nights I went, oh my God, I can't do this. But what I would have to do in a way was just go, my courage is just to accept and just trust, And I think with fear, if you run away, you bottle it up, but in a way you have to just let it go and drop. Other people have said to me, and it's true, beautiful Kelly Abbey, who's going to work on Next to Normal, she always talks about, and I would do that. Right now, little Darren, who's anxious and terrified, he doesn't have to come on stage. He can wait in the wings and he can just stand there, and I'll come and get you afterwards. And I think all of those things that just can allow the terror to just not deny it, but just let it be and be aside.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure people found that helpful. We are almost out of time. So if I don't think there are any more questions lined up now. So Kylie Harris just says thank you for answering that question. I would just ask you that, if you hadn't worked in theatre, if you didn't train as an actor all those years ago, what do you think you might have done with your life?
I was going to say, and I didn't trust myself. I could see myself being a primary school teacher, but it's not to underestimate how hard it is to be a primary school teacher. That's partly because I think I'm a big kid, but also I do love the nature of nurturing. Maybe that's kind of what I would feel very comfortable in the world of that kind of plane, but it would be in maybe the health industry, but it would be in something helping. I mean, or an aid.
I think you'd have been a brilliant primary school teacher. Well, look, we've just got one more question from Kylie, and then I think we need to wrap up. And she's asked, how do you resolve confrontation with difficult personalities as a collaborator? So I think what Kylie's asking, if I'm understanding it, is that when you're collaborating with somebody and they are tricky, how do you deal with that confrontation?
I don't know. I think everyone has to deal with it in their own way. But I guess to answer what you're asking is that maybe from my commercial theatre background, where you just have to do it and deal with confrontation, I try to take the persons aside when I can or when it's appropriate and have that honest chat. I don't think in a rehearsal space you can just gloss over those difficult moments or situations or people. At some point, there was going to be a terrible pussy pimple that's burst and it's hideous. So I always go, it's better to deal with it and talk about it, Anneke, and either take them out for lunch, and that's what I've done, or ring them up, or actually even gently go, can we just chat about what happened? But it's better to talk about it than not. I have never seen in my career it work as an actor or director where it hasn't been dealt with. Somehow there has to be a medium and you have to talk about it. I don't know if there's any other self-help book to deal with personalities. The problem is we are all fabulous and big children, and we have to kind of be patient to a point, but actually then be honest as adults and go, let's grow up and let's agree to disagree or whatever. But it is my responsibility as a director to deal with tricky people and to deal with those situations. I don't think it's fair, and the producer, I don't think it's fair to allow it to linger, because it infects and causes a virus, which is a terrible metaphor, to the rest of the rehearsal room.
Yeah.
Someone said a long time ago, to finish up, Anneke, that when you leave a rehearsal room, in fact it was Trevor Nunn, I think, the temperature and the energy you leave a rehearsal room is what you see on stage. And I've always never forgotten that.
Yeah, wise words. All right, well, we should finish up there as we are now out of time. All the best for Next to Normal. I hope the rehearsals are wonderful. I can't wait to see it on stage. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this conversation with Darren Yap. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, neighbour.
Thank you.